Hello, I'm Charlie from OCCA, the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. Today we're going to be talking about being creative, particularly about using our words. And I'm here with Storm. Storm, would you introduce yourself?
Hey, sure. So my name is Storm. I am 25 years old. I'm a full-time spoken word poet and I absolutely love the creative arts. And I'm looking forward to talking more about how my faith impacts my poetry and my creativity overall.
Well, we're going to talk a bit today about sort of your calling, your kind of how you discover this kind of vocation and sort of where it's going and things. And also particularly about how the fact that you're a Christian and your journey with God influences what you do creatively. So perhaps you could talk a bit about your journey of faith. Kind of where did things begin?
Wow, that's a pretty deep question. So when I was a teenager, my brother had a car accident. He got hit by a car at 40 miles per hour. Just to preface this, my uncle is in the biomedical field. So I grew up very fascinated about science, wasn't particularly interested in God. So when my brother had this car accident and landed on his feet, shattered his legs, his rib cage, had prefrontal cortex damage, I remember looking at him on the road and he said, you know, Storm, I'm sorry, I love you, closed his eyes, and literally I got on the floor and was like, God, if you save my brother, I'll give my life to you. I didn't know God at the time and I didn't know who I was praying to, but there was just something in me that just felt led to say that. Also, just a bit of context in that as well. I had godparents. Not all my godparents were Christian, interestingly enough, but the ones that were very good, and they dropped me to school. My godfather dropped me to school every day and he used to say, prayer changes things, prayer changes things. Storm, remember this. He's from Montserrat. He's like, Storm, remember this. You know, when you are in difficult time, you pray because it changes things. And I was never interested, never really cared about it, wasn't bothered. I was more interested in science and the Galapagos and, you know, fluid in the stomach and how we came from fish and all sorts of stuff like that. So when my brother had this accident, I realised, you know what, even though I love science so much and I love what it can do and the advancements of it, as a teenager, I realised that there wasn't really anything that could save my brother at that point but a miracle. And that was the start of my Christian journey.
So what happened? What happened to your brother?
My mum called me, I think a couple hours later, because they had to fly him in a helicopter to the hospital. And she was like, it's not looking good. So I prayed again. And she called me back about an hour later and she said, he's stable, but they've said that he's not going to walk again and all sorts of stuff. So I prayed again. I was like, Lord, like, I want my brother to walk again. I want him to, you know, have a life that's fulfilling and fruitful. And sure enough, with my mum, we helped him, you know, kind of wash, you know, walk again and talk, and with help of medical professionals as well. They were absolutely brilliant at Royal London. And he started to walk again about a year later and started talking again, having, you know, normal conversations. And I think for me, it's that experience that has stuck with me. I'm a very logical person. So of course, after that, I had a lot of questions, but if that didn't happen, I probably would not have been interested at all. So I think God uses those scenarios for.
So to sum up, you'd kind of grown up in the context where some of your godparents were sort of saying, you know, prayer changes things.
Yeah.
But actually you're not really interested. And then this thing happens and you kind of go, you know, what do I go to in this situation? And you went to God. Funny
enough, at the time, I just didn't really know what I was doing. I don't want to kind of make it out as if I knew what I was doing at the time, but it was a sense of desperation. And after that point, because I was so logical, I was like, you know, God is so good, why is there suffering in the world? Started asking, you know, what were Adam and Eve at the beginning of time? Were they mulatto? You know, where did they come from? Where are these other people? What do we say about evolution? What do we say about marriage? All sorts of stuff. But that definitely was the catalyst and the start of my journey. Just before that, that accident also, I was very suicidal. So there was a lot of kind of abuse that was happening at the time. And so I tried to take my own life. And that was a really rough time, you know, being a teenager. But I look back and I think, you know, with all of these things that have happened, I know that God was chasing me down. I just wasn't interested, if I'm being honest. But yeah, I believe that God was really chasing me down and searching for me.
So it wasn't even just your brother's accident, it was what you were going through at the time. Had you prayed sort of in desperation before that, or was this the first time?
No, I didn't care about God. I didn't have any interest other than proving that he wasn't there. So for me, it was this thing of, okay, since God doesn't exist, I will read the Bible just to confirm that he doesn't exist. Do you know what I mean? Since he doesn't exist, I'm going to understand more about the natural world. I'm going to understand more about the humanistic approach. I'm going to understand more about our biological makeup. But what I was doing is I was compartmentalizing the world. I was separating God from the world when actually he works in tandem. He works in relationship with those things. So no, I wasn't very interested until that accident, if I'm being honest.
And so the accident happens, you pray. Mm-hmm. It looks like things are actually going even worse, that there's no hope for your brother. You keep praying, then things improve, right. And there's this journey, and a year later, things are, astonishing.
Yeah.
Why did you ascribe that to God, not just to medical science or anything like that?
I think there's two things. There's experiential, and then there's what's happened. In the moment where I got on the floor and prayed, I definitely felt a sense of peace that was surrounding me. I can't describe that. I can't explain the feeling, but it was there. And I knew that this was something bigger than myself. I think the second thing is based on what the medical professional said. If the cut had been any deeper. I mean, my brother, he has a scar. He had a scar all around the side. His intestines were out. Blood is rolling down the road into the drain, into our sewage system. It was very clear from a medical perspective that he didn't have a very high chance. I mean, he was quite young as well. He was 8 years old. It was quite intense. And so I knew that it wasn't down to us, and God was working through those medical professionals. He was working through the church I didn't particularly care about, and the people praying. He was working through our family, and forcing us to think about life in a deeper way. And so I definitely believe that it was definitely beyond us.
And you're saying you're a very kind of rational person. So you've had this experience, this event's kind of taken place. You've got all your kind of ideas about science, and you're interested in the Galapagos and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
How did you begin to kind of put that together? I mean, or assuming that you have, how did you begin to kind of line up those different kind of, I suppose, bits of evidence in front of you in the world?
I have always had a desire for knowledge and to understand. I think truth is so important. And if truth exists, which I believe it does, and that's what's best for us, then I want to be the best version of myself. And if I can be the best version of myself, why would I not want to be? So I must pursue truth. And if I need to pursue truth, then I need to go through whatever means are possible to do that. So I began to study. I would sit for hours. I mean, throughout the summer holiday, because the accident happened in May, literally throughout the whole summer holiday, read the Bible cover to cover. I'd do research. I'd be on PubMed searching up journal articles, reading, all these different books. And I still love that. But that's how I know that God was also searching for me, because since my childhood, I've always been interested in knowing and understanding what does life mean. And if you speak to my parents, they will literally say that Storm just would get annoyed. They used to say that I'd get annoyed at school because people would talk, and I'd be like, "Why are you talking for? I want to listen. Leave me alone. I'm not interested in playing. I want to read my book." One time when I was a kid, I actually walked into a lamppost because I was reading my book, because I was just so interested in knowing things.
Was there a key moment when things fell into place, or was it a series, or was it just something that happened gradually?
Well, the accident happened in my teens. I think it took a couple of years to kind of get through understanding kind of the core tenets of the Christian faith. But I think I have this poem called End of You, and it's about my experience with suicide. And there's a point in the poem where essentially I say, like, God, if you're real, then you're going to have to show me. So I get to this point of the poem where I'm like, there's nothing else. I can do all of the study I want, but it has to make sense to my soul. It has to touch something, because especially in this society, which is full of information, sometimes we want to know everything, but we don't actually want to apply it to anything. We just want to know. But I'm like, God, I need this knowledge to mean something to me. I can't keep acquiring all this information. I'm not a robot, I'm not AI. Do you know what I mean? I need it to sink in. So I was in my room and I was like, God, like, I understand the God man. I understand how Jesus comes in flesh and the reason for why he has to die on the cross, because we're sinful and you want us to have a relationship with you, and the veil tore and all this beautiful stuff. I understand that. I understand why you did what you did in the Old Testament, why there had to be the shedding of lambs and why there had to be sacrifices, and one had to be sent off into the wilderness for as an example, as a shadow of Jesus coming. I understand that, but I don't know if it really means anything to me. I don't know if it's really, I want to hit the table, but I don't want to destroy the microphone. It's not getting to me. I'm not sure if it's revelatory.
You're in your room, it's going, here's this truth, it's all out there, I kind of get it, I'm, intellectually you're kind of, but it's got to, is it actually revelatory? I love that kind of idea.
Yeah, it's this thing of the intellect, because again, and I think I'm still kind of always making sure I'm careful with that, because what do you do with that knowledge? There's a scripture, it reminds me, I see even in 1st or 2nd Peter, it says, add to your faith. Add to your faith goodness, then goodness knowledge, and knowledge self-control. Like, knowledge is the start. But love is the real revelation here, because love is at the top of that ladder. So if I'm just sticking at knowledge, anybody can read a book, anybody can know loads of things, but it's what you choose to do with that knowledge and how you choose to apply that to the appropriate season that you're in.
Thank you for sharing your story. Could you now say a bit about how, for your excitement, interest, your love of study and that sort of thing, and it's obviously led you into kind of words and visuals and beauty and the impact through that. How did that come about?
But when I was about 5 or 6, I sat down in the summer holiday, bored out of my mind, and my dad was like, why don't we write a poem? And I was like, why would I want to do that? I couldn't, I suppose at the time, see the intellectual worth in writing a poem. It just didn't really resonate with me, if I'm being honest. And he was like, why don't you write this poem? So I wrote the poem, and it was called School Break. We sat together and we wrote it, and it was about how I was bored in the summer holiday. And I still remember it to this day, but that's how I started. Moving forward, I became really interested in words, and so I started writing plays and writing loads more poems and became really fascinated by it. But when I got to 14, just after the accident, I joined a poetry collective, and it was in Stratford. And we would just do lots of kind of poetry exercises. It felt quite intense, but it was really good. And I suppose that's the start of my journey.
So is there anybody particularly that at that stage for you was inspirational, that you can look to and say, that's somebody I want to be more like, or somebody who really shaped you in those early years?
Yeah, there was someone in the poetry collective, and his name was Emmanuel Sugo. I'm still in contact with him now. But just the way he would use his words, it was like violence on a page. Oh my goodness, so good. And I remember I would send him my stuff, and he was very accommodating, especially as I didn't really have anyone around me outside of this collective that was writing. And I'd send him, what do you think of this poem? And he'd just rip the poem apart in the most graceful way possible. I think he wanted the best out of me. He wanted me to do well. And I think I always appreciated that. He definitely inspired me and forced me to actually understand what poetry actually is. Because if you don't know what you're doing, or if you don't have context for it, then you don't really know if you're doing what you're doing well. One of my favourite literary devices is a Volta. I have quite a few, but that's one of my favourites. And Shakespearean sonnets use it quite a lot. They have an octave and a sestet. Octave is the first 8 lines, the sestet is the last 6 lines. In the middle is a Volta, which is a change in thought. And I love that because it's necessary in our current context to make sure that when we're actually communicating, we're potentially looking at the first side or the first perspective of something, and then forcing or encouraging people to change their minds or change their perspectives and ideas about something. But I would never have thought about that or thought about how important a Shakespearean sonnet is if he just wasn't challenging me in my writing. So I'd probably say him, although I don't want to say any more because I feel like I might miss some people out.
But that is lovely, isn't it? That's when there's somebody who actually cares enough to challenge and pull apart. It could be done ungraciously, I suppose, but actually when someone says, I see you and I pay attention, and I think probably particularly as a creative, but isn't trying to say, you've got to do it my way, but actually I want to help bring the best out of you.
Yeah.
And therefore I'm going to bring all that I can, and I'm going to stretch you, and I'm going to question you, and I'm going to push you, because I want you to really come out here. And I suppose particularly when someone's trying to write something, you want their voice to be heard.
Exactly. I totally agree. And I think also when it comes to support and supporting people, I think it's necessary that we do that in the creative field. I personally find that the poetry field is it feels like there's a lot of gatekeeping because the opportunities are few and far between, which I understand. But there is this struggle of sharing or giving feedback. And I think sometimes I suppose that's across all sorts of fields, but I do think it's necessary that we do that so that we can get better and so that we can present good art, because art it changes the culture, it impacts culture and it influences culture, so we need to.
Can we go to your creative sort of process? How do you kind of begin? Like, where does the kind of idea come from, or or where does the sort of vague notion actually become something like a project?
Right. Do you know what? The concept of creation comes before the concept of creation. What I mean by that is, if you are not reading, if you are not studying, if you are not exploring, traveling, understanding the world around you, you will not have anything to write about. So the first thing is you need to build a life that is fruitful. You need to build a life that is exciting. If you're not excited about your life, then who is going to be excited about it? You need to find things that bring you joy, that challenge you, that make you question things. I don't like to be in environments, like, funny enough, I like to be at church because I think there's real beauty there, but I like to be in environments with people that don't really think about things in the way that I would think about them, because they challenge me and they force me to think in a different way. Even though I'm a Christian, I recently read a book about atheism called The 7 Types of Atheism by John Gray. Very interesting book. I'm not an atheist, but I just wanted to hear his perspective. And whilst it didn't really change my viewpoint on Christianity, I really appreciated that perspective. So I think before you have any ideas, you first have to build a life that is centered around excitement, fruitfulness, and making sure that those ideas come naturally rather than, let me think of an idea today, if that makes sense. But then once I'm in the creative process, I suppose there's so many things, there's so many ways we can go about this. The first thing I tend to usually do is research. I don't like to write about anything if I'm not well equipped to write about it, well versed to write about it. I would research around the topic, and then I would research about the devices that I would use. So some devices are more effective for putting together a point or a perspective more than another. So for example, if you have a rhyming couplet at the end, essentially what that means is that the last 2 words rhyme at the end. If you're doing that, are you doing that just because you can't think of another word, or are you genuinely doing that because you understand the effect of that literary device? The point of doing that is to present some sort of resolution, some sort of well-rounded conclusion, for the most part. Of course, you can be creative and so forth, but that is generally what it's used for. And so I like to kind of build my work from that perspective, researching, thinking about literary devices, looking at some inspiration around the topic, maybe look at some art, go to a museum, go and travel somewhere where maybe they're talking about that thing, go to a protest, even if I don't necessarily agree with the cause. That's how I start my process.
I suppose there's just the reality of life. You've got to earn a living, you've got to kind of live somewhere and eat something.
Yeah.
How does that kind of come? You've got these ideas, you've got this creative process. Traveling and it's not free.
Yeah.
How does that kind of connect up then? Because I think that is a tension for many people in the creative space. Is how much do I get to do what I'm really passionate about and I love? What extent do I actually just need to put food on the table?
It's difficult, and I definitely understand because I've been in that position before. However, I did know that I was called to do poetry full time. So I think that's one thing. It's about calling. not everybody that is good at art will necessarily do it full time. I think there's also like a business element to what you do. So you can be good at art or you can be good at being creative, but if you haven't got the business acumen to negotiate contracts, put together a contract, you don't know any lawyers, you've kind of got a bit of a problem here. So I think there needs to be a balance. I mean, I remember even the other day, like I was speaking to one of my friends and he's a poet and we did the same gig. I'm going to call it a gig for the sake of this, but we did the same gig, we did the same event, and I asked him, we were having a conversation about pay. This was a year difference between when I did it versus when he did it. And honestly, what he was charging was like slave money. It was literally, honestly, it was to the point where it was like, you've not considered how much time you're putting towards this. If you charge £50 for something, you know, and you've spent 12 hours doing it, that's not sustainable. So you have to make sure that you are accounting for what you're doing. You know, otherwise it's not gonna be sustainable. So I think the tension a lot of time for creatives is not just that they're good at something, but it's developing the business mindset to understand, okay, this is an asset. And if I've got an asset, I need to make sure that I am pricing it in a way that makes sense. And I think it's also down to network as well. Like a lot of the things that I've been blessed to do has been down to who I know, even favors I've done for people, like, and not thinking that I'm going to get anything in return. I mean, some of my best like kind of clients have come from me just giving someone a compliment. Like it's wild, you know, but God opens those doors. I think that's one thing, but also it's down to character. It's down to how good you are at something. There is a tension there, but I'm not sure there is as much of a tension there as much as there is a lack of knowledge.
But I'm also struck by a couple of things you said, but you've actually got to believe in your own worth. You've got to actually think, you know, my time is valuable. And also you've got to actually sort of make it worth it. You've got to put in the work. So you're saying if you're going to write a poem on something, you want to know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
You've got to apply the hours.
Yeah.
How do you then do that though? Because it very easily could sort of, almost move into something where actually we begin to feel quite big-headed and all our self-worth comes from what we're doing and how much people value us. And, you know, that kind of someone's worth their salary, that feels too far. But also not this idea that, you know, people say, oh, well, you do this, so it'll be good for exposure. Like, it kind of feels like, actually, you're not respecting me here.
No, you're right.
How do you do that? How do you work that balance?
You're right. I have had a lot of that, you know, and from some pretty sizable companies. I don't mean like your local church, you know. I'm talking about pretty big companies saying, oh, can you do this for exposure? I think I've gotten to the point now where I don't have to do things for exposure. So maybe if you're at the beginning of your career, you can negotiate. Maybe it's not for exposure, but it's like, okay, can we negotiate maybe a lower rate or whatever the case may be? But I think you have to have confidence in your ability. I think you also have to accept that if you're at the beginning of your career, you may have to, you know, do a few things for a lower rate. But going back to your question, your initial question, I think you have to make sure that your confidence is not placed in your ability. It has to be placed in something outside of you. So if I make an error, for example, if I'm doing a huge performance, and I have made some errors in the past, it doesn't happen very often. It may happen once every 2 years or so. But if I do, I have to acknowledge that I am human and that my self-worth, my self-identity is not placed in this one mistake that I made. But actually, I have to look at my skill holistically and who I am. And who I am is somebody that's very good at their ability or their craft and their poetry who has made one mistake. So I think for me, I make sure that I place my identity in God, and I make sure that I don't place it in, you know, how many gigs I'm getting or how big the company is. I mean, this year, like, I nearly worked with Adidas, and it was a bit of a blow. I'm not gonna lie, because I personally quite like Adidas as a brand.
Hoping for some sort of discount or arrangement.
Give me the lifetime Adidas
swag.
No, but genuinely, I genuinely love Adidas because I wear their stuff. I like their stuff, and I didn't get it, and I was I was upset, I'm not going to lie. But I can't place my identity in this one thing that I didn't get. Because if I do that, then what's going to happen is I'm not going to have confidence to do anything.
Well, I'm struck by that. I mean, I've got some friends, particularly in the kind of more creative field, and you can be quite brittle. So you've built up this whole career, and actually something goes wrong, and it just cracks you.
Yeah.
You mentioned that actually you find your identity in God. So can you talk a bit more about how it is that your faith helps you in that? Because obviously not everyone does believe in God.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, I think my faith gives me context for what I say yes and no to, because it gives me an understanding of my moral reality, what I should take and what I shouldn't take on. So in the past, I've been asked to do, for example, like swimwear. It's just not something I would do because it just doesn't align with my brand. I'm not saying that swimwear is sinful. Hopefully that makes sense. But it doesn't align with my brand, and it doesn't align with what God is asking me to do. Or even alcohol, for example. I've said no to doing things to do with alcohol because I don't drink. So first of all, it's an integrity thing, but also I don't really want to promote drunkenness. Is that to say that brands are promoting drunkenness? But in the culture that we're in, I'm not sure how much influence I can have in a set advert where I'm not the creative director. I'm providing those kind of parameters to make sure that this is something that I suppose is more beneficial to society. I have to work within their parameters, and that is what happens when you work with bigger organizations. And sometimes that's okay, and sometimes it's not. So it gives me a sense of morality. I think for me also prayer is important. So I pray quite a lot when it comes to opportunities, decisions that I need to make. I'm married also, so if I'm traveling away for a long time, I need to think about my marriage. Lord, can you help me with this? What's the decision I need to make? Essentially, God is my compass. So he directs me and he guides me. One of my favourite scriptures is Psalm 23, and it says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." And I think what's beautiful about that is God is the restorer of the soul. As creatives, we are pouring out like so much every single day. We're giving because it's so much energy to be a creative. I don't think people realise this, that it takes so much time. And I think that's why the arts is underpaid. But anyway, that's another conversation. We pour out so much. And the problem with that is when we don't go back to the person who gave us the gift, who is God, who is the creator and who is a creative, what happens is that our soul becomes dry. We don't get any replenishment. We don't see the fruit in what we're doing because we're not being watered. We're not being watered by the creator. And so I think that's so important that when we are trying to navigate our gift and trying to grow and develop in all these different areas, we have to make sure that, okay, I'm going back to the person that gave me it. I need him to give me wisdom. I need him to give me guidance. And that's what I always try to do when it comes to my poetry.
But there are many creatives who don't believe there is a God or believe different things about God or gods. Mm-hmm. How can they find that replenishment?
I can't help you. I don't know if I can help you. Obviously, there are kind of practical things you can do in regards to mindfulness. You can go to a counsellor. There are some good resources out there, but do I want good resources or do I want the best? Do I want the person that knows everything about me and knows about my struggles, my weaknesses, my difficulties, or do I want to go to somebody that is going to be good and is going to help me, but is not going to, I suppose, know every single part about me and can appeal and tailor this to me? That's what I want. I want somebody that can do that. And that's a big ask. And the only person that can do that is God. Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you.
It's been great. I hope you found this helpful and encouraging, and I hope it helps you on your journey.
Hey guys, how you doing? It's me, Tom Cousins. Here's the Ocker Studio. I'm actually part of an organisation called Ocker, the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. We make films about the big questions of life and how the Christian message has valuable, we think, answers to those questions. If you enjoyed this film, please check out the other stuff on our channel and also consider liking and subscribing. It helps us make more stuff like this. Also, we want to hear your thoughts. If you've got any ideas for future content, please drop us a message in the comments or send us a direct email. Thanks go out to all the people that made this possible, including the lovely people behind me. Here's a fun fact for you. It takes about 60 hours to make each one of these films, and it's all made by our in-house Ocker staff who are funded by donations. So if you do have the means and you feel like it, please do donate. On our website, we've got a helpful button labeled donate, very easy to press. All right, God bless you guys. Bye.